This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast. We're brought to you by Prize Picks, coming at you in the wee hours of the morning here on Thursday morning. It's June 27th. I just got back from Target Center after round one of a draft where the Wolves selected Rob Dillingham from Kentucky, 8th overall, and Terrence Shannon Jr. from Illinois, 27th overall. We'll get into those two players, how they might fit into the context of this Wolves roster. I think it says a lot about how they're constructing this thing going forward. We also got the chance to talk to Tim Connolly for a little bit after the draft. So we have some quotes from him that we'll mix in as well. But I got Kyle Tighe here with me for some immediate reactions. Let's get into it. What's up, Kyle?
Just technically speaking, still Wednesday, June 26th out on the West Coast. So I want to give a quick shout out to the birthday boy himself, Rudy Gobert. There's a French connection tonight watching that draft where I think you can go back and fact check this. I think half of the draft was French players, or so it seemed, especially at the top. So cool night for international basketball, but also a really cool night for the Minnesota Timberwolves and their fans in the front office, because what seemed like maybe one of the least interesting nights, drafts, whatever, in recent memory became a night where the Wolves are now, the top team listed in a lot of winners from round one, night one of the 2024 NBA draft. So exciting stuff.
Yeah, let's get right into Dillingham. Let's talk about what they traded so as to be able to get them. It was not a trade up from 27 to 8. San Antonio pretty clearly wanted to move out of this draft and, trade their 8th overall pick for a future first-round pick. The Wolves were eligible to trade their 2031 first-round pick.
I'm going to stop you. No, because you're a professional, but let's stop because now you're getting too smart. For the fan, you're at the arena tonight. You're with all the media people at the practice facility. The Wolves have no assets, right? That's always the narrative for this. And you're going to explain how this happened. But with the new CBA and all this stuff, it's just like, they're going to draft 27th. So the Spurs get Castle right at 4. Mm-hmm. Awesome guy. Everyone watched him play for UConn in their championship run. Then they get 8 and they get this Dillingham kid from Kentucky. Like, oh my God, like him and Castle and Wemby. And then seconds later, I think it was Shams had it first, like they're trading this pick to Minnesota or this player. But for us fans at home watching her, there was 45 good seconds where you knew you were getting this kid at 8, but you didn't know what you were giving up. And if you're an idiot like me, who kind of forgot that every year you advance now in a draft, you open up the window of future, like 2031 is so far away. That's like, am I going to be here? You're not going to be in our 40s. There's about 45 seconds there where I think people thought, is Carl on his way out? Is Naz Reid on his, like, is Naz Reid and Wemby going to be the coolest front court in the history of the NBA? So there was like a little window there before you carve it out and explain this, that we're like, okay, we're getting this awesome electric bucket as Tim Connolly described it, but no one knew what it was for. So sorry to interrupt you, but that was like 45 seconds of pure chaos because we're all looking for the answers and all we know is we're getting this prize, but we have no idea what we gave up.
Yeah, well, because this, as of literally yesterday,
right,
they did not have draft assets that are like picks that they could have traded to go get this. When the Wolves made the Gobert trade, they traded obviously 4 first-round picks. Right, the rules are you could trade them every other year, so they traded 4 of them, and you can only trade 7 years out into the future. So couldn't trade any more first, right? Well, it flips. The calendar year, whatever, flips on draft night. So 2024 draft night, you can now trade 7 years out into the future, your first round picks. And that was, again, really the only asset that the Wolves had to be able to trade. And they just said, unprotected, you can have that in 2031. We'll take Dillingham from Kentucky at 8th overall. I mean, that's not an unprotected for 7 years into the future for the 8th overall pick now, is kind of speaks to a little bit about what the quality of this draft was perceived to be or is perceived to be, or certainly by the Spurs, where they could be like, we would rather have your unprotected first 7 years from now rather than this 8th overall pick right now. I think that says I think it says a lot about where the Spurs and the Wolves are at,
Mm-hmm.
and, they're probably like, okay, we're going to have this unprotected first from Minnesota that, maybe years down the line, who knows? It could be something to them after. And the Wolves are going to have like 4 different iterations of their team probably by then, right? So I get it from their perspective, but from the Wolves' perspective, it makes a ton of sense on a couple of different levels, right? Like they need things now. They're ready to go. Tim Connolly said in his press conference afterwards that we're at the table now and we're ready to go now. Now, normally, right, going now wouldn't be okay. 19-year-old, come on in. Those aren't normally ready to go things, but I think it's important context that the Wolves have no other way to get things. They can't go sign players. All they can do is sign their own free agents, bring back Kyle Anderson, Monte Morris, Jordan McLaughlin, or sign minimum contracts.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're Tim Connolly in the Wolves front office, you're like, we need more now. We're at the table. What can we go get now? And that is limited to, trading one of your pieces that has value, one of their, Cat, Rudy, Nas, Jaden, something like that, or just that draft pick. And so they go, I think it was a creative way, is what I'm trying to say, of improving the roster when you had given these new salary cap restrictions and roster construction restrictions. It was pretty much the only way to get better now without trading your valuable pieces on your roster, which they didn't want to do, what they don't want to do. So I think that makes a lot of sense from the Wolves. And then we can get into the type of player that Dillingham is and isn't. And that archetype of player that he is and isn't, I think also fits into the context of a Timberwolves team that's pretty starved for the need of offense after being a below average offensive team last year, but also the number 1 defensive team. So to that end, it really lines up for the Wolves, given this new structure that we're learning of how team building is going to work in this new modern NBA.
Yeah, credit to you, because you were on that like in the moment. Again, a lot of us were just like myself, just celebrating and just ingesting as many Kentucky highlights as we could. Also learning on the fly that this kid could be special and is a bucket and has about as much aura and swag as Ant had coming in to the league. But just learned about 4 hours ago that he left his sophomore year of high school into junior to go play at the Donda Academy, which was Kanye's school. So that just adds.
Tim just like slipped that in there. He's just adding like the place he plays, like, yeah, in Donda.
Yeah. I remember being like, Donda, is that like Dartmouth? And I was like, oh, no, different school. A couple other things, just again, if you go check out Dane's timeline on Twitter, because the way you broke that down of this is kind of, as we navigate this new CBA and we hear all these terms as fans, as second apron and all these things, there are going to be like loopholes. That's how any of these CBAs have worked historically. I think your point about this is kind of the best way to go get a, $5 million, $7 million type guy. But you can't do that in free agency. You can't do that in a trade unless, as Tim said after the night, that you'd have to give up a real rotation player, and they don't want to do that. They just made the Western Conference Final. So I thought it was really interesting. Also, too, watching it at home, I don't know if you saw this, but one of your favorites of all time, we just got to give him a little shout out. Gorgie Jang in the Spurs front office, doing the Wolves. Just all of a sudden they pan to every front office and there's like 92 people in each one. And there's Gorgie just kind of sitting. So maybe he pulled some strings to make this work. But yeah, on terms of the pick itself and what this kid brings at 19 years old, I've been saying this, I think, since like January. I don't know a lot, but I've been saying this team doesn't have a lot of guys that can dribble. They don't have a lot of guys that, if you had to put a gun to your head and say, after Ant right now, before the draft, who's the second guy on the team, top of the key, 8 seconds left on the shot clock, plays broken down, that you think can get a good look? Because I always think like Nas Reed. You know what I mean? Like that's probably the second guy on the team that I would trust in that type of situation. Well, not only with Dillingham, but then also when they go out and get Terrence Shannon we can talk about him too. They just got a couple other guys that can just get to the rim, get a good shot, athleticism, speed. Those were things that, yes, this was a Western Conference Finals team, and they have 7 of their best, rotation players returning next year, but they still had like real holes. And I thought just with the Dillingham pick, they addressed a lot of those holes in one move by just giving up a pick that, again, like who knows where we'll all be 7-8 years from now.
Just quickly, reminder: we are brought to you. We'll get into Dillingham here in a second, but all these episodes are brought to you by Prize Picks. Obviously, the NBA is not going on right now, but the WNBA is. There's like the 4th of July hot dog eating contest is up baby. There on Prize Picks, and like futures for the NFL. So do check out prizepicks.com or download the Prize Picks app. Use the promo code Dane for a $100 sign up bonus if you are putting together your daily fantasy lineup through Prize Picks. And then also I've been using the Autograph app just kind of for all the Timberwolves content being in one place. It's a free app. You can scan the QR code on the screen, but just Autograph at the App Store, download it, and all of your Wolves content is kind of aggregated in one place, whether it be podcasts like this show are in there, articles. You'll see all, I'm sure, the interviews and a bunch of Wolves team content in there. I just like that it's all kind of in one place. If you want to sit down to read or listen to a podcast, I think that's the place to go. That's the Autographed app. Use the referral code Dane Moore when to let them know that you came from us. All right, Kyle, let's dig into Dillingham's game here. I don't pretend, and I'm not going to pretend on this episode to know his game deeply by any means.
This is low ceilings. Tyler Metcalf and his crew are no ceilings. This is low ceilings. We don't know much, but there's enough out there, tape and stuff. And then again, reading what Tyler and those guys wrote. But yeah, go back to the intriguing part of what this guy could bring to the team.
Yeah, well, I think we do have a good idea of what his archetype as a player is, and we can think about that within the context of the Wolves. And I think that's what you and I can talk about here. And I was just, going through Sam Vecini, who does a great job in the draft, and he was kind of doing a live blog throughout on every one of the picks with John Hollinger. And I want to read what the very beginning of his Rob Dillingham piece was, because I think this is the context I'm talking about when thinking about Dillingham in the context of the Wolves makes him more attractive. This is what Vecini said: how one evaluates Robert Dillingham depends on how much one values scoring touch and the ability to separate from defenders. I know evaluators who work for NBA teams who value his scoring upside so much that they have Dillingham as a top 5 prospect. That potential mixed with his passing improvements have Dillingham believers thinking he could be the best overall offensive player in the class. They have a point. His offensive tools are special. But that first line, how one evaluates Dillingham depends on how much one values scoring. The Wolves value scoring. And that's a nice way of Sam saying he's not good at defense. Mm-hmm. And again, what better context to put a dynamic offensive weapon that has defensive limitations into than the team with the best defense that can protect him, at least in the regular season, to some extent there, and a player who's going to give you not just offensive juice, but a type of offensive juice to what you were saying before that this team doesn't have. They have the term Connolly was using in his press conference, where he said this is what Finch was saying to him, is we need more players who can break the paint. And, we think about just like the bucket getter, and I think that's the way most people are going to think about Dillingham, but there's just on this Wolves team, there's value in somebody who can just get downhill, get by you, and get to the middle of the floor, break the paint there, look to score or look to pass. They've been missing that. Last season, they signed Shake Milton to be that guy off the bench. He obviously wasn't. He really struggled while he was here, was traded by the deadline. And the year before that, Jalen Noel was in that bucket getter role off the bench, and they really tried to lean into that. They gave him a lot of chances, but the effectiveness and the efficiency of when Noel would break the paint, that didn't work either. I've heard repeatedly over the past 2 years talking, to Finch or to the people in the organization that this is a need. Remember back at the trade deadline, we were talking about backup point guard, movement shooter, or bucket getter. And I got those from the organization. Those were the three things that they were talking about. They have been wanting this bucket getter thing, has been just as top of mind to them as backup point guard was, or kind of is to many of us, and how a movement shooter is to this team. They value that a lot. And we haven't really had a proof of concept of that, because it's like, okay, you keep saying you need this, but you went with Jalen Noel and Shake Milton as your guys there. Well, now they have really invested in a player with that skill set, in that archetype of player. And I'm curious to see what it does. We haven't really been able to picture that within this Wolves team, because nobody, again, other than Ant, has been able to do that successfully. That's obviously not, really Jade McDaniels' game, Kyle Anderson, Mike Conley. Dillingham is different, and it's something that they very clearly believe is a need and could kind of have a pretty big ripple effect on the offense if Dillingham can be effective in that role.
Yeah, you said Shake Milton and like Jalen Noel. Another one that I was thinking of, as soon as the pick was made, by the way, I just started spamming Metcalf with my thoughts. Yeah. I'm sure you love that. But one thing I texted him, I was like, he's not Bones Highland, right? He's like, no. Like, he did way more in the SEC than I think Bones ever did at VCU. But and then he also reminded me that the last time I think Tim Connelly drafted a Kentucky guard in the top 10, it was Jamal Murray. So that made me feel better. But Tyler just
texted me A+. That was the only thing he said.
Well, the first thing I texted him was just, I love you. So I think he knew. But it is like, to the point of, we had those three holes that we talked about of what this roster has. And it just goes back to, it's hard to watch a team that has guys like Ant or Nas or even like a Jaden and be like, I think this team lacks athleticism. But I really do. I mean, I don't think Carl, with some of the injuries he's accrued and getting a little older, is deemed athletic, and Rudy is in great shape, but he's not like the most athletic, and same with Mike. And off the bench, I just thought this team needed more speed and more, just creativity. Again, that scenario where you have a broken shot clock. I mean, this team's offense a lot of times did have no set play anymore. 8 seconds left. What are we going to do? 6 seconds left. And a lot of times maybe it was like a quick Mike Conley call for a screen or figure it out, or just throw it to Ant, right? A lot of grenades for this team this season. So what Dillingham can do with the ball in his hand, and I love that phrase of just like breaking down or getting into the paint. He's going to have to learn to pass more. I thought you had a cool like highlight that you posted that he did make one pass. I think that might've been his only pass at Kentucky.
I don't know, man.
But I think again, also too, he's 19, right? Like, I mean, I joke about the Donda thing, but if you kind of look at where he came up, I mean, he just didn't play in a lot of super controlled environments. And then at Kentucky, that's obviously, I sometimes think, especially under Cal's last year, that it's a little too controlled. And he was playing again in a backcourt with a guy who went 3rd overall in Reed Shepherd. So it wasn't like he was the only guy there. But I just think his creativity, his speed, he is a little light, right? 160 or 165 for a weight, 1.5 without shoes. But none of that stuff really bothers me, because you just see like the best version sometimes of like a Jamal Crawford, or when they were at their peak, not Wolves Jamal Crawford, but just a guy who you can trust even in a second unit, right? I know we're going to think now about long-term, and I would imagine his locker next season is next to Mike's, right? And he's going to have this veteran presence as they kind of groom him to be the point guard of the future. But even just off the bench, I heard Tim say after the draft tonight that they want to play fast in that second unit. And I don't know if there's a lot of guys that are faster than Dillingham.
Yeah. Like, what is going to change with this team, barring some sort of, major trade that is unlikely to the starting lineup, is the bench is going to evolve this offseason, right? You have 3 of your key bench pieces from last season are unrestricted free agents, and it's going to cost a ton of money in luxury tax payments to retain any of them. So that's going to change. Plus, now you're bringing in 2 first-round rookies. And Tim said Dillingham is going to play right away. So how I phrased it to him was like basically like if this works out in your image, like what does this bench unit, how does this bench unit look different next season? And he said we needed to be more athletic, we needed to play faster. Finch wants to do the pace and space sort of thing, which I was like, really? Which I think he does. Right. I mean, but it's within the roster kind of constraints that he had just from having such a big team. It hasn't really looked like that. But this is like the vision. I think Dillingham is kind of like the vision of what the new identity of the second unit looks like. Now he's 19. He's very undersized. That bothers me more than it seems to bother you. We'll get into some of that stuff, but he kept hammering the pace, the speed with which they could play, but also to Dillingham specifically, that he really is an underrated playmaker. And you watch him play, you see highlights, and it is the buckets, it is the pull-up threes, it's the flashy game. But I think what he said, and I think what jumped out to us is sometimes the guys who look like him at first glance tend to play selfish basketball. They over dribble, don't make quick decisions. He's a quick decision maker, and I think his IQ is elite. And the playmaking, not just looking at his highlights, but really digging into the analytics, we were kind of really impressed by a guy that can balance that. 15 points a game in 21 minutes a game, 6 assists per 36 minutes. And in pick and roll, he's more apt to pass than shoot. The more we dug, the more impressed we were. So they are not exclusively seeing a bucket getter in Rob Dillingham. They're also seeing a player who injects pace into this thing and probably can play make more than the perception is out there right now.
Yeah, on the size thing really quick. I wish he was 6'4". But if he was 6'4", he would have gone number 1 to the Hawks, despite what they have in their backcourt already, right? Like if he was a bigger guard, and especially in a draft that they didn't really have any sort of clear-cut number 1, he would have gone first overall. So as Dane has it up on the screen now for YouTube, 6'1", height without shoes, wingspan 6'3", and then weight 164. I always love how you find these things. I don't know what database you're in, but here are some players that Dane found with similar measurements: Steph Curry, Patty Mills, Kemba Walker, Norris Cole, Seth Curry, Shabazz Napier, Monty Morris, Trae Young, and then again at the bottom, Bones Highland. Those are just a couple of the names, but there's a wide variety, right? Tyrell Terry to Steph Curry. I mean, it's a pretty big gap. But again, I think what it shows is that, those guys, especially the ones that are confident and have the ability to not only score, but play make. I think that's what separates some of the guys on that list. Some of those guys are buckets, but the guys that are multifaceted, I think you can just either not hide their size. I know Tim said he wants to challenge Rob to play better defense, but I don't know, on this roster and this team with so much length, I think you can give up a little size just to go get a position or a need or a skill set that this team was just lacking, not just this past season, but for seasons going, I don't know, as long as Finch has been here.
Yeah, I think a lot of those players that I listed with those, limited height. I mean, the real thing is how light he is.
That one's tough.
Yeah. And what the database thing is, or where I'm getting that from, is just the combine, right? They have that all on NBA.com. And so how I had to go through to sort that stuff was I started by weight, right? Because he weighed in at the combine a month ago at 164. Tim said tonight that he's 168, but it is very rare that, that a player comes out and is less than 170 pounds. Again, he's 19. Obviously there's room to, to put weight on and strength on there that he will just necessarily need to do. Those like Steph Curry and Trae Young, like these are the guys that worked. There's other guys that didn't put on there because we wouldn't know their names, right? They went to the combine, or maybe they were, they're a pick that didn't work. A lot of times, being undersized is impactful and is a detractor. Least so at the point guard position, right? For the true point guards. And Tim said he's a 1. He said he's a 1 that's a bucket. It's not like teams can't survive that, right? You need to account for that with defense around it, probably size around him. I don't think it's like some sort of death knell that he's that he's undersized or that will make him some sort of horrific problem defensively for the entirety of his career. But he comes in with defensive concerns, given that, he is undersized. And when he's needing to navigate screens in the NBA, when it's, Jonas Valanciunas out there, that's going to be tough at 165 pounds. But it's part of the trade-off, right? If he was, like you said, if he was 6'5", and if he was 195 pounds, you might be talking about the first overall pick in this draft. That's some of the trade-off that makes him available at the 8th overall pick.
But I think this conversation because I think we should go back to some of the good stuff, but these are real concerns, right? Like, to be small, especially in a league that just continues to get bigger and stronger and faster, it is a real concern. I was looking up Reed Shepherd just to be like, I don't know, man, Reed Shepherd's kind of small. He's 6'3", 187. So it's a lot bigger than what Rob is. But I think to the bigger point, and this was the theme of the night for the Wolves in their first pick at 8, but also at 27 when they took Terrence Shannon, is that they also, if Rob was bigger and just weighed more and 3 inches taller, the Wolves would have never had a chance to get him. And the same with Terrence Shannon with some of the off the court stuff that I think we should talk about. But I don't want to call Rob Dillingham a distressed asset, but Tim and this front office just seem to be really good at finding a really talented player that might slip a little bit for some reason. This is
that's been their MO, right?
Like this is what draft stuff is all about. Is you find an organization that is like, well, he's too small, so he's off our board, right? Or he had some off the court stuff, he's just off our board. And the Wolves, I think tonight was a big example of it. They just kind of leaned into, okay, well, can we find ways to, again, not hide Rob Dillingham on defense, but are his negatives, here, but his positives just so outweigh? And Vicini or even KOC or just a lot of people that really hammer home this draft stuff, a lot of them saying he might have been the best just pure bucket getter in the draft. And the Wolves desperately needed that because back to the Noel point, or even just kind of a, as we talked about last week with the offseason primer, running this back again, which seems very likely by choice because it's a good team, but also by constraints of what the second apron bring you. I think people were probably more bummed about running it back with like the bench, right? Like, okay, is it just going to be no offense to these players, but like, is it going to be a Jordan McLaughlin thing again, a Monty Morris, Kyle Anderson? They've added some dynamic, unproven for sure. Like the ceiling might be a little higher, but the floor is a little lower by bringing in a 19-year-old to a team that kind of has a winning pedigree now. They still have some young guys like Ant, but it's kind of a veteran team now. And you're going to throw a 19-year-old out there to, I don't know, spot start 15 games when I'm hoping that Mike Conley sits a little more. So it's a tough challenge for him, but it's hard for me as just a fan and kind of thinking about the draft all these years. I've always just wanted people from Kentucky. Because I really think, like, all jokes aside, just if Rob Dillingham was literally from Dawn to University, I'd be like, I don't know, man. But these Kentucky guys, they usually hit, and they've been all shapes and sizes, and they've slid a little bit in the draft for one thing or another. But I think that is kind of a safety net for me, is that when you draft a kid from Kentucky, they usually, even like Brandon Knight or whatever, like had a good, solid, okay career. I just think they found a team that was willing to, by the way, I interrupted you like 30 minutes ago, but not only did they trade a 2031 unprotected, they also did a 2030 pick swap, right? And that was like top 1 protected. So they didn't give up much to move way up in a draft. You're not going to see that again, right? You're not going to see 2025 draft that has way more talent, a team move up 19 spots by giving up essentially 1 first round pick. They capitalized on the moment. They capitalized on the market and the situation of all these other teams maybe not wanting to invest multiple rookies. And the Wolves said, hey, we were a good team this past season, but we actually do need to inject even more youth into what is, I think, an actually promising collection of young guys now that Tim Connolly has put together.
I want to say with the one other thing on the defensive, I think it's just every recap you read, and when it has pros and cons, it's going to say defense for Dillingham in the cons. But I was thinking about this, just a week ago or whatever, looking at the draft and even just free agency as a whole. And being bad on defense wasn't an option last year. just wasn't.
Yeah, right.
Like nobody who played that was bad at defense. Like, I mean, who would it be?
Well, Shake Milton for like a hot second.
Yeah. And then he got traded.
Yeah.
But then even when Monte Morris got traded for, it was kind of like this. It's kind of the same thing. You know, he's more of a pure point guard rather than a bucket getter, but the numbers and the question marks. Remember, I had Ryan Blackburn on, who covered him in Denver. You know, he was like, you know, the weakness with Monte is his size and being able to guard. Monte didn't have any problems guarding. And I think part of that was the culture of the defense that the Wolves had, where it was just an expectation that, like, this is part of the job of playing on our bench when there's a limited amount of minutes here, right? 8 to 20 minutes a game. If you want those 8 minutes, or if you want your 8 minutes to turn into 16, defensive is a requirement. And I think that will be really important for Dillingham, starting in that culture that will challenge his weakness. Tim Conley was asked afterwards, you alluded to this, are you going to need to protect him on defense? Tim Conley said, we're not going to protect him. We're going to challenge him. We're not here to hold his hand. He's a very competitive guy. There are plenty of examples of guys that are slight, that are plus defenders. Certainly it's not easy when you lack elite positional size, but he's an unbelievably competitive guy. If that is true, and what we know about the Wolves defensive culture, that's just going to like seep into the cracks some. And so that's why I go back to what I was saying with the Vicini thing at the beginning. Like, Dillingham's value in particular as an all offense, no defense guy lies in the eyes of the beholder. And the beholder here can kind of hold that water for him for some time. So it's not a rip. It's actually like, this might be the perfect team for Rob Dillingham to come into, that has defense to protect him and has a need for more offensive creation.
And I think, despite how strong draft coverage has gotten, right? I mean, Tyler was awesome on the pod the other day, and so many people now really dig into and watch the film. But I still think a hole or a gap in draft coverage is just, it's so focused on the player. And that makes sense because that's kind of the known, like, that's all you know is I can go watch all the film on Rob Dillingham. I can study his life trajectory from a baby to where he is now. But once you start talking about fit, I mean, I think this in all sports, but fit is just, to me, literally the number one thing. Like, I think Rob Dillingham's career looks 180 if he was just drafted by the Hornets at 6, right?
Sure.
Like, just completely different on a team that, I know they have a new coach and they're trying to create a culture there, but that culture for a long time now has just been kind of a joke and stat stuffing and not taking things that are winning basketball seriously. And to your point, now you're bringing a kid in who is so good at the things that this franchise lacks, but is not good at what this franchise is really good. And that is, I mean, forget basketball. That's just like hiring 101. Like, let's go get a person who fills a lot of gaps and we'll coach them or train them up on things that they're not good at. And it's kind of a win-win for everyone involved. So really exciting moment. It kind of felt like, I was trying to think of a way to comp this, but it just kind of felt, I don't know. Have you ever gone to like an event that you just had to go to? I don't know if it was work related or like with a spouse or something. And when you walk in, they like give you a couple of those like raffle tickets that are on the big spool and they tear them in half. It's like, all right, whatever. I guess I'm in the drawing. And then like you finally won like a bike. Like, oh my God, like I never win anything. I was here already. That's how it felt when all of a sudden Rob Dillingham was going to be throwing lobs to a French guy who was really good. And then we find out he was traded to Minnesota and he's going to be throwing lobs to another French guy. But for 45 seconds there, man, I thought it was the end of Nas Reed. And I think a lot of people listening to this were like, oh my God, that was a scary moment.
It should have crossed my mind, actually. I guess I just figured the 2031 would be involved. I
didn't think it would be enough, I guess, with my thing.
Yeah,
I guess 2031 and a player or something, but
or at least 27. But yeah, the overall price of how little, I guess, it cost. Yeah, that was for sure striking to me. Yeah, I want to keep going. Obviously, we're going to talk about Terrence Shannon here as well. Let's grab our first break. Today's show is brought to you by Your Home Improvement Company, and this summer YHIC is running a special on both bathroom and window remodels. So for a bathroom, it can be a full bathroom remodel or just a simple tub to shower conversion. Your Home Improvement Company's work there was backed by a lifetime warranty and can be purchased with zero money down, zero interest, and zero payments until 2026. They also have the window promotion, which is buy 2 windows, get 2 triple pane windows for free. These windows also come with a lifetime warranty and are installed by certified professionals. Also, zero down, zero interest, zero payments until 2026. You can check out YHIC at yourhomeimprovement.co.com. That's in the show notes. It's up on the screen, or call 866-777-YHIC. Your Home Improvement Company, where it's your home made better. And today's show, if you are buying a home, is brought to you by Supreme Lending. If you are ready for a winning mortgage experience, meet Ben Coulter with the Mortgage Dream Team at Supreme Lending in Edina, Minnesota. They have over 20 years in the business, and Ben knows how to score big when it comes to mortgage deals. Ben is a dedicated Wolves fan. He told me he was there at the first game at the Metrodome. That's how we kind of made the connection here at first. So whether you are looking for your first home or just a vacation investment home, he's here to help you make home ownership dreams a reality with a mortgage. They have the 8-day close your loan in as fast as 8 days. The $25,000 close on time guarantee. They guarantee your deal closes on time. And the Minnesota housing program is up to $18,000 in down payment or closing cost assistance. And in addition, if you mention T-Wolves Special from here, you may be eligible for your first year at 1% below your note rate. Call Ben today if you are in the home buying time and looking for a mortgage. You can call him at 612-268-5454 or visit twolvesmortgages.com for more information. Let Ben and his team help you win your dream home. Kyle, I mean, we can still, I think everything here is sort of connected. Dillingham, Terrence Shannon Jr. But what was really interesting to me was kind of how they approached this draft. And it was our first kind of breadcrumbs of how this whole second apron thing is going to play and impact teams like the Wolves, who are, above the luxury tax line. And it was striking to me at Tim Connolly's end of season exit interview, talking about, we know the second apron is, going to be a burden. It's not something you can be in for an extended period of time, but we really need to see a cycle of how this impacts teams who are at that level and have those restrictions, to know how restrictive it's going to be or what it's going to change. And the way the Wolves approach this draft is very much a byproduct of the second apron. I know we were talking about that earlier with only having, minimum contracts to be able to work with, to replace players. I asked Conley about it afterwards, and he was like, there's just was no other way for us to be able to add talent to our group unless we wanted to trade one of our main pieces. And that's really, meaningful here. That is what is shaping the direction of this team. And I think mostly people are, very excited about Rob Dillingham. Like you said, you want a bike at your spouse's work event. But it's also in ways a bizarre move, like just on paper, as a team who is, right there trying to compete for a championship right now. This is new. This is new because the only way that they could add this type of talent was through the draft, which meant it had to come in the form of a 19-year-old in Dillingham's case, or Terrence Shannon Jr. Late in the first round. I just think it's we're finally starting to see some of how this luxury tax and new just sort of whole salary cap environment is going to change the way rosters are constructed. I think we saw that with Denver over there too, and how they approach the draft tonight. That's just, that stuff is interesting to me. It's also very relevant for the Timberwolves.
When you don't give me an agenda and you have me stay up late, I just go all over the place. So we should talk about Terrence Shannon Jr., but can we do a quick interjection here and maybe talk about the Chris Finch extension? Because it would talk about what you just said. So the Chris Finch extension happened. I should have known, because when we did our offseason primer last week, you kind of made one of those looks into the camera. I was like, I should have known. So they extend Chris Finch right to 2027, 28. When that 2031 pick will probably be entering high school. But so they have Finchy now locked up long term. And I think, to get into your point, but before that, I think it's big. I think it's really big, because I think he has some flaws as a coach, but I think he's the best coach in franchise history. He's up there, him or Flip Saunders. I think at the time that they extended him, kind of gave me flashbacks to when Gerson was let go kind of right before training camp, and they elevated Sasha and Gupta. But really, Chris Finch was kind of like the face of the franchise, or the vocal person. I mean, Sasha's just a more reserved, quiet person. So during a chaotic time in this organization, Finch kind of stepped up and was the father figure, or the adult, or whatever you want to say. I think it's really important that they did that again now. I would imagine if the ownership transition had just smoothly happened in March, that you would have seen, I don't know, him and Tim be locked up long-term together. Tim chose, to opt out to move it to next year. So then it's kind of just left to Finch, who again had some years left on his contract. But I think whoever made the decision, new ownership, old ownership combined, I think it's a really big, big moment for this organization to have that stability and to have that structure again. And I say all of that because I've been someone who has been kind of critical of Finch on like one thing, and that's maybe trusting some of the young guys, or just, hey, give Leonard Miller some run in November and stuff. And he hasn't done it. But then I saw he talked to Doogie today, and, Doogie was like, you got these couple picks tonight and stuff. Like, what should fans expect? And this is before the Dillingham thing even pops off. And Finch was pretty good about it. He's like, I played rookies when I got here. And he did. Like, he came in during Ant and Jaden's kind of rookie year, and Nas is like, what, a second-year guy or whatever. So I don't think, and this could be being apologetic, or this could just being so pro Finch, but I don't think sometimes the things that Finch doesn't do that we wish he would do are because he doesn't want to do them, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, we talk about sometimes with like the offense, he's got some things he needs to work on, and they need to do some more structure. They need to find better ways to get guys in the right spots. But sometimes it's just like on the players. And I think spinning that all the way back long-winded is that it was so out of left field that they got the 8th pick in the draft. You don't go get the 8th pick in the draft and just not play him. Like, Rob Dillingham's not going to live in Des Moines. You have to play him. And I think Finch is open to playing him. And I don't think Tim Connelly makes that move to go get him. Or for a guy like Terrence Shannon, who is, I think, now the 6th oldest player on the team. Like, seriously, I think he is the same age as Jaden, and he's older than Ant. I've been kind of critical of not playing the guys. I don't think Finch had to play those guys in those spots. But now that he's got more youth to kind of play with, and you might lose Kyle and you might lose Montana and stuff, he's going to be forced to play him, but I don't think he doesn't want to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I also think he would have played him if they could play.
Yeah, that's fair. That's
I mean,
that's a good point.
I mean, we go to 2 years ago, Wendell Moore Jr., right? That was their late first round pick. They're through 2 summer leagues, and even in the G League, there's been nothing really to indicate that he can play at the NBA level right now. So he didn't. Josh Minot was drafted as a 19-year-old project in the 2nd round, and he's really athletic and kind of fun and stuff. I'm not sure Josh Minot. I am sure Josh Minot would have had an adverse impact at 20 years old on the 56-win team that went to the Western Conference Finals. I'm not saying he can't play. He could have played on the Hornets. He couldn't have played in a way that would have helped the team. Like, what would we point to that Josh Minot would have been able to do that somebody else, wouldn't have been? Leonard Miller too. It was 19 years old. Absolutely, like, very intriguing from a physical skill set, but I would say even more of a project in ways than Josh Minot was. Where was he going to come in and play? And what was he going to do last season? Like, those guys weren't ready to do anything. We're going to give like Leonard Miller some of Naz Reid's minutes? Are we going to play him on the wing? Can he shoot? Like, you have a much more NBA ready skill set, I think, from Rob Dillingham and Terrence Shannon Jr. And I need to watch these guys more. Like, I don't know, but if those guys play in the rotation this season, it will be because they can play.
Yeah.
The Wolves are one of the best teams in the NBA right now. And they're going to play players that can help that. The Wolves were very aggressive about getting every single win they could last season, as they should have been, because they were pushing for the 1 seed in the Western Conference. It would have been valuable to even have one more win, right? And then you're at home against Denver in the second round. I think Finch, to what he said to Doogie this morning, I didn't see that. Like, I do think Finch will play players who have a skill set that he is confident would be able to help them right now. I don't think he had that confidence in their rookie years or second years from Wendell Moore, Josh Minot, and Leonard Miller. And anecdotally, from my perspective, I don't think those guys were ready to do anything either. The skill set of Rob Dillingham, as we talked about at the beginning, that makes sense. If he is at all NBA ready, the skill set he has, nobody on the team other than Anthony Edwards has. You said Naz Reid was like the next most of that bucket getting skill set. And he was some people still call him a center. So yeah, I think at least Dillingham, actually, I think Dillingham and Shannon are both apples and oranges to those last 3 picks, because Dillingham has a skill set and because Shannon's older.
And I do too, but I was just, my dad. I know my dad's going to wake up tomorrow and be like, what's the difference between this rookie and these other rookies? And it's like, well, Wendell Moore was drafted like 26th, and Josh Minot was drafted in the 40s, and Leonard Miller was drafted in the 30s, and Rob Dillingham was drafted 8th. Like you said, skill set and all that stuff matters too, but I think sometimes just the politics of you just kind of traded your last remaining draft capital assets that you can trade to get the 8th pick in the draft. Like, this kid's going to play. And now pivoting into Terrence Shannon a little bit, the difference between, him and a Minot or Leonard Miller is he's a 4-year senior, or like he's played a lot of basketball. So does he have a skill set? He averaged, I think, 9 free throws a game. That's probably more than
most
everyone
in the country.
Yeah, it's more than every other Wolves player besides Ant, basically, according to my stats. So, and again, not to close the loop on the Leonard Miller thing. This team now has 11 guys on their roster that are 25 years or younger, and I know not all those guys are going to pan out. I tweeted out twice tonight Matteo Spagnuolo's name. You remember him? But so they're not all going to hit, but that's not the point. Is the point you just have these chips that were low cost. Again, kind of the raffle ticket thing, like lottery tickets. And I still think Leonard Miller has a chance and Josh Minot has a chance. But the 2 guys they got tonight, to your point, just are a little more proven already. And I think we've talked about Rob and what he can do and some of his shortfalls, but what he brings to the table offensively. The Terrence Shannon stuff, he kind of has like a little Tyreek Evans in him. He is really physical. Another thing this team probably could have used a little more of is just pure physicality. I don't know how good he is defensively. I never know how good a college player is defensively, but he can get to the rim. Maybe he's now 3rd on the team in terms of 8 seconds left, ball at the top of the key. Just like, can you get to the rim? Can you get a good shot? He was really good at that in college. And I don't know if his shot's translatable. I don't know if he's going to shoot like that. I don't know what you think about his shot, but I just think he's another one of these kind of dog mentality type guys that's going to bring something to this team in transition. You're starting to see a lot of young, kind of thoroughbred type guys that as this thing evolves and Ant does start to creep into his peak prime years, he's going to be surrounded by a ton of dudes that are athletic, can shoot, and can get out and run.
Yeah, I think part of the young guy thing, and I'm not saying Wendell Moore can never play or Josh Minot can never play or Leonard Miller can never play. They are part of another timeline. and then I think that's important in the context of the draft tonight, because Rob Dillingham and Terrence Shannon Jr. are in that group now too. Now Dillingham's probably in the immediate window as well, but that, to the salary cap point and the limitations that this team is going to have, we were talking about this a week ago. Like, they need to have guys that are going to come in maybe 2 years from now or a year from now and be in the rotation, because it's not likely that Nickeil Alexander-Walker will be back after next season. Naz Reid's a free agent after next season. This team needs probably a couple of those guys to hit. If that group is now 5 guys between Moore, Minot, Miller, Dillingham, and Shannon, they need to be the reinforcements to the Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards group that is, under contract for the next 5 years, that might not have the Kyle Andersons, Mike Conleys, Naz Reids, and Nickeil Alexander-Walkers around them. So that's a big part of all of this here too, is maybe they can help now, but they also have to help in 12 months, 24 months, when this team, again, is just absolutely needs reinforcements.
I think it's worth mentioning too, just anytime you're a fan of a team, it's because you want to cheer and root for those guys and their success. The Terrence Shannon stuff does come with a little bit of a red flag. I think you can Google it. I think there's people that have talked about his off the court kind of case and written about it and covered it way better than I could sum up. But I thought Tim Connolly tonight, when he was asked about it, addressed it pretty spot on. Terrence Shannon Jr. was, I believe, found not guilty or acquitted of whatever happened earlier this summer. But, if I'll be excited to hear what he has to say about it too. Anytime someone's in that type of situation, you want to hear what they have to say. But, Tim has tried to, one of his kind of mottos since he got here was he wanted to bring in good people. And I thought he went out on a limb tonight and really stood up for Terrence and said a lot of things about how, talk about his coaches at Texas Tech before he made his way over to, where did he play college at? This is like good prep
Illinois,
by me. Yeah. Illinois, yeah. That every coach said he's not a good kid. He's a great kid, and they raved about him. So I think that's just an important thing to add in there, because when you wake up on Thursday and you start trying to Google these guys and figure them out, he does have that a little bit to him. But that was kind of the off the court thing I referenced earlier, where if he was a perfect prospect, he's a lottery pick, right? And if Rob Dillingham is 6'4", he's a top 3 pick. And I think what the Wolves did tonight, back to your second apron and everything that is lined up in front of this team in terms of hurdles or constraints, they've been trying to navigate those and still just go find, again, like kind of depreciated assets that they think, hey, that's a good kid. We know he's a good kid and nothing bad happened and we can prove it, but we got him 10 picks later than he should have gone. The same with Dillingham. So I'm excited for the Terrence Shannon thing. I mean, I hope it's not like, we can't just love every young player. And I know I get guilty of that. Like, I hope it's not like Lazar Hayward. We're like, oh, this kid played at a good school. Like, maybe he's a little shifty, but the numbers on him were really good. I know he was like, I saw Metcalf was tweeting out like he was like 82nd percentile at the rim and 91st percentile in pull up and 80 percentile in spot ups. So he is maybe not the bucket that Rob Dillingham is, but he is another maybe plug and play. Like, maybe you can just throw him out there. And I know it's weird to think that he leapfrogs one of the other younger guys on the team, like a Leonard Miller or a Josh Minot, but he's just, he is proven. He has more reps playing real basketball games. And that was one of the things we talked about last week of like the Tyler Koleks of the world. I want just veterans that can come in and have played a lot of meaningful basketball games. And I think Terrence Shannon is kind of up there in terms of guys that have played. I mean, didn't they make like the Elite Eight his final season in college?
Yeah, so they lost to UConn.
Yeah. So that's a guy that you can bring in, and projects are fun and projects are necessary. Like, I still have really high hopes for Leonard Miller, and we haven't even mentioned Jalen Clark's name, who's another, depreciated asset from last year, where if he doesn't tear his Achilles, he doesn't go that low in the draft. So they kind of have a taste or a thing that they look for in these drafts. And so far, those young guys, no one that Tim Connolly and his front office have drafted have done anything for this team. I think that's a fair criticism. But then their pushback would be like, well, we didn't need them to, because our team is still loaded. So it's going to be an interesting kind of timeline moving forward of how do they start to integrate these younger guys into a roster that's really loaded. And to my 11 guys under 25 or younger, some of those guys are Naz Reid, Jaden McDaniels, and Ant. And that is the hardest thing to find. These lottery tickets, those are usually cheaper and a lot easier. And you just hope that one or two or, God forbid, three of them hit.
Just because Tim Connolly was asked about Shannon and his trial, I'll just read what that quote was. He was asked about the digging they did into Shannon's trial. Did you do any extra digging into that? Was the question. And Connolly said, quote, we did a ton. I think it's a shame that it's even a footnote. I think it's a shame to say he was acquitted. I think if you really dig, it's a really unfortunate thing for a kid, by all accounts, is a great kid. Oftentimes, the minute you're accused, you're found guilty. Thankfully, he went through the legal process. He chose to go to trial because he knew he did nothing wrong. I just think it's a shame he went through that. And I think it's a testament to who he is as a kid and his ability to play through a really tough distraction. I personally need to do more research into that, but I think it was a mistaken identity from what I had was he was identified, mistakenly identified at the bar in Kansas, and that it was somebody else. But he was identified as being him. And that's what I know on the situation. Went to court to prove that it wasn't him, and he was acquitted of it because it was, again, allegedly somebody else. So that's that element on it. That's what Tim had to say. I just say that to explain why he's saying I think it's a shame that it's even a footnote. That's my understanding at this moment of what was going on there. But as a player, let's get into him. I always it just helps me why I always do these measurement things of
this is awesome.
Picturing what the player will look like in an NBA context. It's important to know what they look like. Like with Rob Dillingham, right? He gets the Tyrese Maxey comp, right? It's well, no, Tyrese Maxey weighs 40 more pounds than him. That's not what he's going to look like on the floor. He can have a very similar game to Tyrese Maxey, right? But physically it makes a difference. So this always helps me, particularly kind of with further prospects down the line, of being okay, this is what it will physically, what he will look like. So Terrence Shannon Jr.'s measurements at the combine were, he was 6 feet 6'6" without shoes. So that's typically, players that are listed at 6'7", that we think of in the league, 6'7", maybe even 6'8". His wingspan was 6'9", and his weight was 219. Here are some other players that I found that had similar measurements: Dylan Brooks, Miles Bridges, Troy Brown Jr. Put that one in there for a Wolves comp. Kenyon Martin Jr., Sam Hauser, Corey Kispert, Jaime Jaquez, and Stephen Castle from this draft had similar measurements as well. So again, I just say that those are probably players you've actually watched play before, and maybe you haven't watched Terrence Shannon play. That's physically, his makeup. Obviously, all of those players have very different games. Sam Hauser is different than Kenyon Martin Jr., but they are both, 6'6" without shoes on, about a 6'8", 6'9" wingspan, between 210 and 220 pounds. So that helps me kind of picture Shannon and then think about him in the context of what I've seen in the limited film that I've watched of him, like the zip and the burst out. The transition stuff is what pops the most when you just watch him grab and go, right? And that's the pace that Conley's talking about, wanting to inject into the second unit. You don't have to watch much to see what that looks like. And then also with that, sturdy build, just getting downhill, with the Dylan Brooks body going downhill, we can understand how that, is going to probably be able to push through resistance in the middle of the floor or even at the rim to some extent, because this is a burly 23-year-old dude who's also extremely, athletic. The measurements, or those measurements, don't highlight that, but this is a big wing that really has some zip to get out in transition and get downhill to the basket. I think those are the things we'll see immediately from him, whether it's in summer league or in the preseason, or even potentially in the rotation this year.
Lazar Hayward was 6'6", 220. So
It
physically, I was on it.
yeah, there you
But
go.
and he was also kind of a bucket. I didn't know his 4th year at Marquette averaged 18 points. He only got to the line like 2 times, so not the same type of player.
He also said that he could see dead people. That's a real thing. I think Jerry Zagota wrote that story. That's a real thing where Lazar Hayward said, "Google that." Somebody Google that.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm
You
gonna
brought
Google
up
that on
Lazar
the fly.
Hayward.
No, it's just
I'm literally Googling Lazar Hayward dead people right now. Get that up there.
Is that your work computer? No, I think he was, I said what it was like in the moment for fans watching at home when they drafted Dillingham. At 27, I thought it was interesting as they got close to drafting Terrence Shannon Jr. because on the board, there was other guys that I think we all kind of liked, or everyone kind of had their own flavor. Like that Tyler Kolek was someone I was like, I don't know if he'll be there at 27. Isaiah Collier was there, who a year ago was kind of framed as maybe the top pick in the draft. Cam's guy from Baylor was still there. And then Shannon. So I kind of thought after hitting a home run, and we've both agreed that right now the value it took to get up to 8 to get Rob Dillingham was a home run. I was curious if they would do what the Knicks were doing, like shaving dollars off of their luxury tax bill by moving back a pick or two and like getting a bunch of seconds. It's no Minnesota Timberwolves guard Lazar Hayward sees dead people from Deadspin. So we've closed that loop. It is now midnight on the West Coast. But, I was curious if after getting their guy, and maybe you can comment on this too, what you were thinking in the moment.
I'm actually reading this article right now.
All right, long story short, I was, OKC, I think traded 5 seconds to get up into that end of the first round again and get a guy that they really liked. I was wondering if Tim would try to do that to kind of say, hey, we got our guy. We addressed the biggest need on this team, and the biggest need by far was not only backup point guard, but point guard of the future. And I think they addressed both short and long term. With Terrence Shannon, who has a really interesting skill set, a guy that when you think of Timberwolves, I guess wings, again, you're going to think Ant, but like I'm thinking maybe Jaden, or when Nikhil comes in, or even a Naz Reid a little bit. I mean, he's probably the closest to Naz Reid in terms of his physicality and just his head down, but he's way more polished as, you have graduated Naz to being a wing, but he still came in as a big. I mean, Terrence Shannon is just a wing, like a real kind of prototypical wing. Maybe not the wingspan. Maybe you wish he was an inch or two taller, but I'm just excited to see. He's another guy that, I don't know, has this team really had a player like that that's a little more proven, has a little more refined skill set, but just can attack the basket like that? That's just another thing that, bucket getter, slasher, put pressure on the rim, this team just doesn't have enough of. And I'll be curious to see what he can do and what kind of minutes he'll get, because I think he also, in addition to Rob, fills a really big need on a bench that really just lacked. I know they're the 6th man of the year, but a bench that you would not say was prime for scoring outputs in any game.
Before I compare Terrence Shannon to Anthony Edwards here, I'm going to reference that Sam Vecini in his like extensive breakdown of Shannon, just like in his profile, which Vecini did not know at that time that he was going to be going to the Timberwolves. He references like the physicality of cool. Anthony Edwards and the way it looks like when he's going downhill. So what I was thinking about in that context is or maybe for Wolves fans, like when Ant was very sloppy and didn't really have a jump shot, like his rookie year, beginning of his second year, know what I'm kind of talking about? Yeah. But there's like, man, there's still like this force to be able to get downhill, get through people, and even be able to. Ant early on in his career, like he had that at Georgia, like a little bit of an ability. I don't want to say that Terrence Shannon is like a great playmaker, because the assist numbers certainly don't bear that out, but like gets into the middle of the floor, like can pass a little bit, but is really just trying to get downhill. It's like, I know he's older than Anthony Edwards right now, but that's what I was thinking of, like kind of picturing in the Ant context of like, this guy is just physically bigger and stronger and more athletic, if not to Ant levels, but kind of looks like Ant before that rookie year when Ant didn't have the shot figured out at an efficient clip. But Shannon like does take the pull-up shots, right? He is a pull-up 3-point shooter. He did shoot 36% from three this season. He got to the line, like you said, 8.6 times per game, which was 4th in the nation. He also kind of struggled against, or what I read was really struggled when there was a big rim protector there. That also sounds a lot like Anthony Edwards at the beginning of his career. So I'm not comparing him to Anthony Edwards in the sense that he has that sort of upside or ceiling, but that's I think kind of the idea of the Wolves is like a deep bench option of someone who can do the downhill part that Ant does when he's able to, to split a screen and just kind of barrel his way all the way through the rim and be faster and stronger than a lot of the other players there on the way to the rim. And that's really exciting when you're just watching clips or highlights or whatever. It's a fun player to watch. The question is, what does that skill set look like in a role player? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like normally that would need to be a main guy. So I would assume again in summer league, he'll get that look as the main guy and he'll get that opportunity with the Iowa Wolves. If he goes down there, he's going to need to figure out how to go from being the guy ball in his hands all the time that he was in his college career and try to weave that into a team context as maybe a 9th man, 10th man, if he can earn that. That's going to be a challenge for him, right? That's not the way he's been playing basketball as I understand it, but that's a pretty good thing to have in your back pocket is that sort of physicality.
He's going to be 24 before the Wolves start training camp. You know what I mean? Like that's pretty crazy. But that's I think someone kind of referenced like COVID. Like that's kind of what some of these drafts are. You just got more of these guys that had an extra year of eligibility that maybe stayed a little longer. So on the defensive thing, because you put up his wingspan, it was what 6'9" wingspan, ranked among the bottom half of prospects at the combine this year. But they also kind of said that his speed allowed him to kind of make up for that a little bit on the defensive end. I think what you just said is really, really smart. I mean, you got a 24-year-old rookie coming in who was a bucket and kind of led his team through a pretty magical run in March Madness. And it's like, can you shift that type of guy to be like, hey, we just need you to play 9 minutes? That's going to be, that kind of goes back to why the beauty of what this team is coming off, maybe the most successful year in franchise history, but has a whole Pandora's box of new questions, not just with some of the fringe rotation guys or roster guys, but what's this going to look like this year, next year, and the following years moving ahead. So to get,
what's related to that? Sorry to cut you off, but the contract is big there. That he's going to be 24 years old as a rookie, and he's going to be making no money for the next 4 years. I mean, it's going to be like $2.5 million this season is what his contract is going to be. The minimum is 2.1. So the Wolves are going to have like 1 or 2 scratch off minimum players, right? At the bottom of their roster, like Austin Rivers 2 years ago signed for the minimum like that. And I think a late first in particular, when it's as cheap as that contract is, I think his deal will be for a total of $13 million over 4 years. That again really plays into this whole CBA crunch or salary cap crunch that the Wolves are facing. And the fact that he's 24, right? Like if he does hit, and I don't know what the odds of that are, low, right? But if he does hit, there's a world where, 2 or 3 years from now, he's a piece and he's making under $3 million. That's a good bet. That's a necessary bet to make if you're in the financial scenario that the Wolves are, and that, he has some upside to his game that if it does hit, it would hit probably in a way significantly more than that. Whereas, some people are going to be upset that they didn't get Baylor Shireman and his 3-point shooting. What really and I think that would have been a totally fine pick, but there's a world in which where Shannon is a real player in a few years, making no money rather than a lot of guys who are drafted late in the first, where it's like, we're just hoping you can be a ninth man in a year or two. And that would be success. There's a low cost and obviously the upside exists in the physical tools that he has. That matters given that he's 24 to me. That if it's going to work, it's not going to take a while for us to know if it's going to work, right? Because he is 24 years old. That's very different than, again, Leonard Miller, Josh Minot, who come in as projects, who are also making no money, but weren't ready to play in the probably first couple of years of their career. I think that stuff matters.
No, I think it does matter, and it's why tonight was really interesting because Tim said it himself, right? Take that man at his word. Rob Dillingham is going to play, and he is going to play early, and he might play if things work out well often. Pick 27 is going to be a completely different story. I was just kind of looking up this while you're talking. One of the comps to Terrence Shannon was like Kelly Oubre, who is a free agent this year, 28 years old. We'll see how the market plays out for him and all these other free agents in new unknown world of this new CBA. But, you know, he's 4 or 5 years older than Terrence Shannon is. You're not going to be able to go sign Kelly Oubre on a minimum and kind of plug him in and be like, hey, you're going to be our ninth guy. Like Kelly Oubre is not going somewhere to be the ninth guy. So I think they need Rob Dillingham to play game one and play often and play early and all that stuff. I don't think they need Terrence Shannon to play often and early. Like you said, maybe he just starts with a stint down in Iowa, but this was more of a play long-term, whoever they take at this pick. It didn't seem like after what they did at 8, they're going to take a guy like Collier, who was also a project and athletic, but it's like, okay, we're not going to get two of the same kind of type of guard through my lens. The Baylor Shireman thing, like that would have been kind of fun, but I think this pick is exciting to see what he can do with maybe a year of seasoning, but all of these guys, all this debt that this team has at some point is just going to be, you're not going to pay the luxury tax. I know Tim said we're at the table now. You don't want to get cheap. I think he's 100% right. Whoever owns this team needs to swallow a really big luxury tax payment because the team is really good now. I mean, you listen to any NBA pod the last couple of weeks and they're talking about next season already and who the contenders are. They always say Minnesota. Like that's crazy from a fan perspective. So the Terrence Shannon thing, again, I think he's got an interesting skill set, maybe mental more than anything of just, can you come off of being a guy and kind of restart that whole process in the NBA?
Yeah, figure out what type of NBA player you are going to be. And that, part of that is on the coaching staff.
Right? Sure. Like when you're 19, you're like, I got all the time in the world. But, when you're 24, you already kind of feel like you're over the hill. So I'm excited to see what he does. It seems like he's put a lot of bad things behind him, things that weren't even in his control. And now he just gets, the Iowa Wolves are going to have a better roster than the Brooklyn Nets next year. And the Summer League team is going to just set viewership ratings because you could have Rob. Also, by the way, just a quick thing. I don't know when this changed, but the fact that we were able to just celebrate Rob Dillingham tonight and have a Timberwolves hat on him and not have to bullshit that, like the Jarrett Culver thing, like he doesn't exist for 3-4 weeks. That was a great thumbs up to Adam Silver on that. But yeah, you got Dillingham. No. You don't like that?
No, it was just because he wasn't traded for a player.
Oh, okay. I get it. Well, I still don't like it, but
no. Anyway. Everyone should wear their hats and be able to be on the teams that they're with. I was like, we were really hoping that the deal would get finalized, so we would be able to talk to Conley about it. Because if the deal's not finalized, he can't. I still think I don't know what we would have been able to interview him about.
If we're gonna Google Lazar Hayward seeing ghosts, I'm gonna tell you that I actually do think seriously that part of the reason Jarrett Culver didn't pan out is because of those NBA rules, and then he wasn't able to be celebrated and like, hey, they drafted this guy. As you put back the article on Deadspin, but that's that summer league thing. I know I applied for my credentials just now. Like we're a couple weeks away. You're going to have, and that's a completely, again, I said ramen compared to steak. Like this is going to be a different level of basketball than what you watched against the Mavericks. But between Dillingham and Shannon and Jalen Clark and Josh Minot and Leonard Miller, like that's a pretty exciting group of guys. And now Rob being the highest pick Tim Conley's ever made during his tenure in Minnesota, he's going to be on a different kind of level than the rest of these guys, even though he is coming in as, I think, the youngest player on the team. But these other guys are going to have a real chance to try to make some noise because as we've said for weeks and months, and you've said for years, like at some point this team's gonna be really expensive, and they need a Josh Minot or a Leonard Miller or a Terrence Shannon to hit and pop. And you kind of saw that throughout the playoffs with other teams. It just had a guy that they've kind of been seasoning up and marinating, and then they finally threw him to the Wolves at a big spot, and it really worked out for them. So an exciting night, and I think it's going to be a really exciting summer, and I'm excited to see some of these guys in real live action and what they can do.
Because it is going to be relevant. Like that second window group of guys that you said, one or two of them are going to like need to pop for the Wolves in this as Ant ramps up into his prime. They need probably a couple of these guys, including the players from previous drafts, to hit as well. So, you know, for many years we were going to summer league. We are just like, I hope one of these guys can play in the NBA. You know, like now it's like, okay, these are real players. Like the Tibbs teams at summer league were so bad. You said nothing. But it's going to be fun at summer league to be thinking about how player X or Y will fit into the Wolves context this season. Maybe. But I think for sure by the 25-26 season, for sure, one or two of the players who are playing in Summer League will be in the Wolves rotation by then. So that's
uncharted territory. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's a good point. Like every Summer League.
And for a good team.
I wonder if the Wolves can have like a star. I mean, I think Dillingham, in the way he plays, could like win a Summer League MVP or whatever. But I just think it's going to be interesting to see. This team will have job openings next season, and it's going to be a battle. Like we know Josh Minot the longest, right? The lawnmower. I think we've fallen in love with what Leonard Miller can do, and now there's a new batch of guys. I throw Jalen Clark in there because no one's seen him play yet, but it's going to be. I mean, that's the best thing you can hope for is just competition, right? Like we got maybe 1.5 spots the first game in October in the rotation. Who wants them? And we're not even worried about position. If you're a shutdown corner like Jalen Clark is, if you're a big like Leonard Miller, whoever just can be the most consistent. And to your point earlier, Finch will play you if you can play. So who can play is going to be something to kind of monitor these next 2 weeks. I just to kind of put a bow on my thought on the draft, and I was looking at the list of all these young guys, and you said the word timeline, so it kind of triggered my brain. Do you think it's interesting? I mean, tonight was all about drafting offense and what you can get from a Terrence Shannon on defense or what you can challenge Rob. But there will come a time in 2031 when they don't have a first round pick and Rudy's like 39 and maybe in the league, maybe not. But there does seem like there might be an idea that they're cooking up for down the road of when Ant does enter that mega prime and he is the Luka Doncic, that they're just going to surround him with athletes. I mean, not just athletes, like guys that can play. It might be a different style of basketball down the road than what we're used to now.
Certainly. I mean, and that is Jaden McDaniels and Naz Reid are in that mold. Like, absolutely. And it's not the style of play that the Wolves have is bad now with the two bigs and, a true rim protector, rim rolling center. Obviously, that has worked with Anthony Edwards. They went to the Western Conference Finals. But I would be stunned if when Ant is 26, that the roster construction looks anything like that. Like, I do not think it will be two bigs. I do not think it will. I don't think it'll be a good defensive team.
Like, it'll be any bigs.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think it'll be a better offensive team. And so it is kind of, and the 2-time, and you can argue about if it is even a good idea to have multiple timelines or whatever, but they are doing that, and this, it'll be cool to get a look at what the players in that second part of the timeline look like, because they will kind of help make the shape of what that next Anthony Edwards team looks like. So it's gonna be fun, man. This really ramps up the offseason, right?
We're in it like now. Like guys are signing contracts and trades are being made. Like the slop has gotten a little sloppier earlier because once the new fiscal year calendar for the NBA kicks off in July, it's going to get more constraints for everyone. So we're in it now.
And I guess just last thing, because should note this, but with the offseason ahead, that's what Tim said is our our focus here is retaining our free agents, Kyle Anderson, Monte Morris, Jordan McLaughlin. And he said the market is going to determine that, which, there's going to be, which I take that to mean there's a limit for how high they're allowed to bid or will bid on Kyle Anderson and Monte Morris. And understandably so, because this luxury tax bill is going to be insane. The Dillingham just adding a $6 million player for next season is it's not just $6 million. You're going to have to pay another $20 million or whatever in luxury tax payments just for adding that there. So this was an expensive move too, not just from an asset standpoint, but from a spending standpoint, which I would think, deters the odds from wherever they were at to whatever they're at now of bringing back a Kyle Anderson or a Monte Morris. But it didn't sound like from Tim Connolly that it precludes those being options of players to come back. So that's kind of what I think as it becomes July 1st and we off season actually starts and we start tracking this going forward. That's what's next up is the bench guys. Are they going to re-sign them or not? And that's when the next episode will be. I'm again out of town this weekend, so this will be the last kind of draft recap pod. We're not going to do one on the second round, which tomorrow they have this 37th pick. But on Monday, Britt and I are going to get together, and that'll be up on Monday afternoon. I'll hopefully have had some more time to watch at least a little bit of these guys, and we'll kind of round up where everything is at. There's been a lot going on around the NBA too that Kyle and I didn't even really get to, but we'll get to that with Britt on Monday, and kind of keep this thing rolling through free agency and into summer league. Appreciate you staying up late, Kyle.
Best text I received last night about the other stuff in the NBA. Tough day for the Jaden McDaniels is overpaid crowd.
That text was from me.
80 minutes on the draft, man. I did not have us doing 80 minutes on the draft this morning when I was looking at stuff. But exciting night. It's going to be, like you said, an exciting offseason. And Summer League is 2.5 weeks away. So after you get back and sober up from the 4th, everyone, it's going to be Summer League. And the Wolves are going to have one of the most intriguing Summer League teams after having one of the most intriguing regular season teams. So exciting times.
Let's do it. He's Kyle Teige. You can follow him on Twitter at Kyle Teige. Again, I will be back with Britt on Monday afternoon. So until then, he's Kyle. I'm Dane. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.